Tell me who you are and who you're with or who you represent.
Sure. I'm Tony McDade. I'm Executive Director of United Ministries in Greenville. United Ministries exists to serve and empower people who are on this transformative journey that's individual, but and calls out the best of the community. And it's a journey toward financial self sufficiency. So we offer 5 different programs that provide emergency assistance for folks who need groceries and help with a power bill or water bill, life sustaining medications. We have a day shelter for folks who live outside and on the street. They can come in the mornings and get their showers and do their laundry and get their mail. So that's sort of the serve component of what we do. In the empowerment area, which really begins in the service, we help folks move toward having sustaining employment. I have a very robust program for that. Sometimes barriers emerge toward that, and it could be, say, getting a GED. So, our adult education program offers tutoring and self paced approach to that, which is also a wonderful way for volunteers to get involved, by the way. And then finally, housing through the Interfaith Hospitality Network, which is a shelter to housing continuum for homeless families that include children.
Very cool. Very cool. So sort of a mixture then of I guess some emergency services and
Yep.
then moving more towards a more long-term solution. Um,
Always customized too. I think one of the things that I say we have great staff to get superlative results, but it's volunteers who show up here who help fill grocery bags and then help tutor someone through a math situation,
mm,
or who spend the night at a congregation welcoming homeless families there. Volunteers make it happen, but we listen very carefully to everybody who comes through our doors. Every story is important. We validate and affirm the individuals who are there, and then try to help them make good decisions, drawing on their own resources and providing additional resources of every sort so that they can eventually, find their way into financial self sufficiency. But the real issue here is that everybody in this town, everybody counts and everybody matters. Every story is important. And so we take folks one at a time.
so how did you personally sort of get into that work?
Sure. And I appreciate you asking. I'm actually a Baptist minister by trade. So for 21 years, I served congregations in the Carolinas as an educator and an administrator. So that's sort of my background and calling. But over time, and part of what I did in those roles was work with people who came to the churches for help, and that help ranged widely, but especially for their emergency needs. And we were glad to do that, but it became the kind of thing that you never knew how the story turned out.
Sure.
People would come, we would help with groceries, and then if they came back again, you always wondered if you were really helping. There's an excellent book called "When Helping Hurts,"
Mm,
and you have to be careful that the charity should not be just pure charity or even toxic, but rather something that gives people a way forward so they can build on their own assets, their personal spiritual assets, toward building a future that's different from their past. Now, that might mean identifying and overcoming barriers such as, say, trauma that has been part of their lives, or an addiction that they have, or just family circumstances. All of those things matter if someone is really hoping to see their future be brighter than what their past has been. And we take the time to work with folks individually through that process. So, in my own experience, serving congregations and listening to those stories, I was serving a church in North Carolina in Statesville and got very involved with our local shelter for homeless people. And that became a very important part of my personal calling as a Christian, as a human being, and as a minister. So that it struck me that congregations are uniquely situated. They are the social organization probably best suited toward helping people holistically. And that includes a spiritual component as well as
of course.
social and emotional and physical, financial, psychological. And so I began to explore that, went back to seminary in Atlanta to complete a degree that focused on this topic of how congregations can minister effectively with homeless people, especially families. And shortly thereafter, in God's providence, the opportunity came to return to our second hometown, which is Greenville, where graduates of Furman and have lived in this area a long time, to work exclusively with congregations sharing hospitality, which is meals and shelter and support for homeless families that include children. And it's the component of having children involved meant that the unique part was that GAIN, as it used to be called, was focusing on congregations who would welcome families in, especially those who had nowhere else to go when they became homeless. That meant big families. It meant single moms with older boys over the age of 10 and single dads.
Where for some of the listeners may not know, then in that case, their only option would be to split up at a traditional
Exactly
shelter.
right. Or continue to stay couch surfing and that sort of thing, or staying in their car.
Right.
I always say to folks, imagine how hard it would be to be on the street, a single dad with a daughter. And so our congregations provide the shelter, meals, overnight lodging that's safe and secure, and the community of people of faith, varying traditions. And they do that beautifully. Then we complement that with the social work piece that we do with great expertise. And in most cases, families flourish because they respond to the nice symmetry of resources.
Right. No, that's great. So really, I think one of the most important things you mentioned in there, or one of the things you mentioned in there and did a great job of, is talking about the difference between sort of emergency needs versus long-term needs.
Yes.
Not distinguishing those as, like you said, when the book When Helping Hurts, that's when you are breeding dependency and those types of
Absolutely.
things, as opposed to creating solutions.
Transformation. The scriptural term, Greek word is metanoia,
Right.
completely turning your life around, or having your life turned around, maybe by the grace of God. And then through the sense that other people care about who you are and love you unconditionally as you are, I get part of my calling these days is the actual joy of seeing people of faith come together and open their doors of their physical spaces and their spiritual spaces and welcome in people probably whom they would never have otherwise encountered. People at different levels of prosperity and different experiences who share a meal together and find that God is very active in that, and the transformative power of that, especially around a dinner table, cannot be overstated, so that everybody's life gets changed in some way or another. If you're doing hospitality right, the impact is reciprocal. It's not just there's one person being a guest and one person being a host. Those roles get mixed up.
Correct.
And when that is happening, you're doing it right.
And Paul talks about that to the Church
Absolutely.
of Corinth, when he talks about the Lord's Supper and how it's people, there you'd have rich people and slaves and everybody dining together.
Yep.
The Church of Corinth practiced also agape feasts, which is just basically big meals together.
And the earliest Christian
homes.
communities were distinguished by the fact that when they had a meal, as you just saying, everybody was welcome. And and that it becomes part of the distinctive factor of who we are as people of faith and Christian traditions, to say that God's love is unconditional, and that our way of practicing that love, to me, the theological term that makes the most sense is hospitality. So that it is something that you extend, it is also something that you receive. It is very visceral. It's the grist
Right.
of life when you're having dinner with someone, or a child is sleeping in a safe, secure place in a congregation, as opposed to couch surfing or in their car. So it's also very practical. The term I've always used is practical compassion, which says that as people of faith, especially Christians, are called to be people of compassion, loving others as God has loved us. That's page 1, I think. But it also means there's some practicality to it. It's not just the kind of thing that just offers a cup of soup or glass of water or whatever it is, as it says in Matthew 25, but it involves being proactive. For example, welcoming the stranger takes a great deal of effort on the part of the person doing the welcoming, and it means you risk something. You could be changed in your presuppositions, about how people got into uh, into poverty.
Right.
There's some folks who feel like the causes of poverty are purely personal, that it's
Right.
some personal deficiency. Others might think it's purely structural. There's some societal issue that perpetuates poverty. I think as Reed Lehman says from Miracle Hill, it's probably both, and then the only way to tease that out is to get to know people and one by one begin to create access to resources that Greenville's blessed with. If we can just be the connect, I think the church and people of faith can be the connecting tissue to support agencies and initiatives in the community to help people out of poverty and to get people to connect with them. That's much more important than slipping someone $5 at the QT,
Right.
in my estimation.
Yeah, for sure. No, exactly. Not that that's a bad thing
That's
necessarily,
right.
but
That's right.
but yeah, that's certainly,
It's not enough. It
it,
is a
right.
good starting point, but if you only do that, it helps you feel good, but it doesn't help the other person. Greenville is a kind of place where we have this innovative approach to saying, let's really not just band aid a situation.
Hmm.
Let's see what we can do, deeper dive, and create an environment, for example, more affordable housing.
Right.
God's children do not have enough places to live in Greenville, South Carolina. I think that is a matter of importance for people of faith.
Right. Exactly. Um, and yeah, I just actually earlier this week, Monday, finished a book called "The Gospel Comes with a House Key," which I highly
Cool.
recommend. I highly recommend. I think it's by Rosaria Butterfield. Um, but actually, one of the main points of that book is exactly that. That as you have been changed with the gospel, you should open up your home to other people. Literally, she uh, maybe takes it a little too literal, but I don't know. I mean, she makes a very good case for the fact that one of the reasons we're blessed with homes is
Mhm.
for it to be a source of blessing to others.
Well, and an extension of that is what we do with what we call IHN, which is congregations welcoming homeless families. For example, we have folks at a couple of congregations this week residing there for the full week. So that the congregations are doing the wonderful meals. And so they're opening not their homes,
Right.
but their church home,
Sure.
so to speak.
Right.
And then folks will go to the church where they feel comfortable
Mhm.
and there are just more resources. For example,
Exactly.
you don't have to have showers at a congregation, but it does help.
Right.
But that's just providing for someone's holistic needs. So
Exactly.
it's very cool. Yeah.
Exactly. Which, the a person's spiritual need is their ultimate need, but it's hard to minister to someone's spiritual need if you're not physically near the person ever, or
That's right.
if you never talk to,
Or if they're hungry,
yeah, right, exactly,
and it's the same concept that a child doesn't learn well at school if he or she shows up at school physically hungry and feeling dislocated
hmm,
from the world. We understand that in the church context, with in the same ways that faith works. So providing for people's basic needs creates an opportunity for conversations. The phrase that I always use it was attributed to St. Francis is that you should preach the gospel at all times in every way, use words if necessary, so
right,
that your life just exudes this sense. And I think about my friends at Highland Park Church of Christ, and I didn't want to be specific about a particular congregation, but they are staunchly evangelical in their perspective. They are traditionally a Church of Christ and magnificently hospitable. So their way of being of evangelism is effervescent. You
right,
can't walk into that place, especially if you're a person that has experienced the hard times in life and not get it. You just feel it. And to me, that is such a special way of being the presence of Christ in the world.
right. No, for sure, and it is. It's kind of it's a shame, especially looking at like 100 years ago or so. It seems like you either had a theologically sound church or like a church that focused on hospitality. For some reason, there was like this hard split, and I think now that's being fixed.
Yeah, it's an integration of the two for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. It should be. They should go hand in hand. I don't know what
Right.
happened 100 years ago or
And they
so.
nurture each other, I think, in some
Right.
significant
Good theology should make us lovers of people, and so we should
way. For
care
sure.
about
For
others.
sure.
Um, yeah, absolutely. What is the sort of what sort of trends are you seeing? I know that you take as an individual approach, but as you take an individual approach, are there particular things in Greenville? A lot of our listeners, about a half of our listeners are in the upstate.
Sure.
What sort of trends are you seeing here locally?
Well, again, I think hospitality serves us well. The city and the county are completing their plans, comprehensive plans for going forward, and it seems clear that we're going to have a couple 100,000 new neighbors over the next, say, 20 years. How we welcome them as a community in every way is pretty much indicative of who we are as human beings, and especially within the faith community. That creates some room for vibrancy,
Right.
because this is a time I think of some uncertainty about a lot of social organizations as they have existed for a long time are undergoing a number of changes, and the church is not immune to that. And so, having congregations work in a way that is not as much sticks and bricks. And for example, this wonderful podcast and blog and so forth that you're doing, Skip, is one just a terrific way of connecting people across wider areas than the usual boundaries. So I see that, but I also see that, as I mentioned, God's children here in the community are having difficulty finding a place to call their own that's safe and affordable, access to mobility issues. And I was talking with a Just Faith group yesterday, and we're saying advocacy makes a difference, and that's about people of faith talking to elected officials
Mhm.
to say these social issues and sometimes the moral and spiritual issues that underlie them are important to me. And the
Right.
way, and it does take, to some degree, it takes a community interest, but in some, it takes policy and it takes funding for us to create a community that is better in the future than it is today. Greenville's a cool place. We're on the top 5 and 10 list of all these things,
Right.
which is great. But Greenville's also a place of contrasts.
Mhm.
So that one Greenville, two realities was how it was said. And we have way too many people. Half of our folks are living in poverty. Children, the number of children who go to school, schools with free and reduced lunch, is way too high for a place that is as vibrant economically as we are. We have the resources. What we lack is the political will. And people of
Right.
faith can have something to say, and there is stuff they can do about that, right up to talking to someone who is an elected official or who works for the city or county government to indicate what are your core values. And
Sure.
that goes all the way up to Washington, D.C.,
Yeah,
for
of
sure.
course. Right. No, absolutely. Have you seen with sort of political changes and with those things, are you seeing uh, people seem to fall into what I think Dr. Thomas, who was someone I had on a podcast a while ago, he quoted William Perkins as saying, using the term nothing buttery, people fall into nothing buttery, which is, oh, homelessness is caused by nothing but this, or,
Yeah.
it's all nothing but this. Are you seeing that increase or decrease? Are you seeing people becoming more educated in general, or is the populace becoming less educated when it comes to like, human needs in the
It's an
area?
excellent question. I think in Greenville, if we're looking at, and in the upstate, the awareness of community needs is growing. Social media is helping with that.
Mhm.
Part of it is just the nature of people here who care about other people and express that in a huge array of initiatives and so forth. So yeah, I think overall, I'm encouraged by a trend that says let's hear everyone's voice and advocate for those who are not as prosperous as others, but also to
Right.
provide the infrastructure that people need to resource themselves toward financial self sufficiency. I don't know a single human being who's self sufficient, and that in my awareness, but financial self sufficiency is a reasonable goal. So beyond that, I think it's this sense that as we, for example, our agency, we're responsible for managing our resources carefully and
Mhm.
connecting people to them, then referring out to the larger community. And that includes throughout the upstate and Western North Carolina and so forth, which is we tend to say that we're emblematic of this generosity and hospitality that is characteristic of Greenville. But this, we're reaching an inflection point. Enough people will be here with enough need to where we're going to have to call out our best angels
Right.
to say what can we do for the least of these, to use the biblical phrase. And that has very practical implications for how we live our lives, but it certainly has spiritual implications as well, as people organize themselves in ways that worship and fellowship and ministry continue to feed their souls.
Right. Sure. Yeah, it's a very real opportunity to either do things really well or do things poorly.
Yep.
It's, the people are coming here, so
And
let's
we're
let's
going to
do it
pivot
well.
one way or the other for sure. We can't
Right.
continue just to do what we have been doing and expect good results. For there are a lot of studies out right now. United Way and Furman just did one about gentrification. I would encourage folks to look at the Greenville Homeless Alliance. We host them here in our building just as a backbone agency for their collective impact efforts to make homelessness brief and rare.
Mhm.
Hit the Greenville Homeless Alliance website and see what it's going to take to make that happen. They just re-released a program, a paper that was done after Tent City a couple of 2 or 3 years ago. We found 100 people living
Right.
under the J.P. Hollis Bridge. Greenville responded toxically at the beginning, which was making it cool for people to stay under the bridge. And what we realized is we got to get people out from underneath the bridge to connect to these resources. And there are substantive ways to make that happen. If somebody's looking for a way to get involved, especially with individuals and families who are homeless, hit that website, read the revised work that's been done, and dig in somewhere. And that means an individual, a small group, and a congregation. Even a larger conference or adjudicatory or whatever can be involved in what I would regard as God's transformation.
Absolutely. No, very good. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention or like to say, or anything that you'd like brought up, or anything I haven't asked you?
Well, you obviously do an excellent job with this, and I appreciate the invitation. When someone is compelled to action by their faith, when there's that deep yearning of their soul to connect with somebody else, it is going to create, both heat and light. And so we get to choose sometimes whether how that's going to work. And most people lean toward the light in
Right.
that regard. And what we have in our community here, and certainly in the faith community, is a sense that we are not ignoring people who are in poverty.
Mhm.
We are aware of them. They are not invisible, whether it's homelessness or whatever. Deb Richardson Moore at Triune Mercy Center is probably the best voice of saying homeless people matter. They are not invisible.
Right.
They and so she has some books about that and so forth. But so we're not ignoring people, but we're not at the point on the spectrum where we're really involved as a community, including the faith community. Who should better lead in an effort like this than people of faith who believe in God's grace, believe in God's unconditional love, and want to extend it?
Right.
So the future's got a lot of opportunity in every way.
No, it sounds like a huge opportunity for people of faith in this community to, because we do recognize that every person is made in the image of God, and so every person matters, whether you're homeless or not homeless, or whatever you've got going on, personal struggles,
Sure.
the whatever is going on, people matter. That's,
Well, and I guess, since you asked, let me just leave you with a quote. I'm a devotee of the German martyred pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
yeah,
Um, and part of the quotation that he had in a way of that organizing life and faith as a way of approaching faith is a statement that goes something to the effect that God is not a timeless fate, but that God waits for and answers sincere prayers and responsible actions. So I think that's our task, is somehow integrating our spiritual practices and our physical practices, practical ministry in the community, and doing that in a way that it works completely in sync rather than as two segments of someone's life or faith. You know, the people that I know who are the most devoted to Christ, most godly in the best sense of the word, are those who have found a way to put those two pieces together and live their lives in a spiritual symmetry.
Absolutely.
That's the challenge.
That's both commandments, right? The
Yeah.
first commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The second is to love your neighbor as yourself. Not one is more important. It's there. You got it. It's both.
It is both
You have to
and
do
for
both.
sure.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, sir.